At the time of writing this script, I have absolutely no idea whether this video will make it out before the Resident Evil remake drops. I would have got it out sooner if it weren't for getting COVID back in February, so I've been a bit out of action, and as you might be able to tell, I am a bit throaty, so I do apologise in advance for you guys. But also, I've got a lot to say about Resident Evil 3. I've mentioned on my podcast, link in description guys, go and watch Video Game Vibes, as well as in some other videos, just talking about my general mixed feelings towards the Resident Evil 3 remake. However, upon replaying it, I do feel like some of my criticism was like a little unjust, and whilst the game length is a few hours shorter than Resident Evil 2 remake, and I do wish that the clock tower was actually an area you could explore, I also would have liked to have seen Jill in the police station being chased out of it by the Nemesis, and these are just valid personal critiques of mine, and I am getting to the point, okay? The Resident Evil 3 remake is still a very good game. It is incredibly pulsating at times. During the Nemesis chase sequences, you sometimes just have no time to take a breath, and I think I personally just did not like that, as I prefer a much more slow-paced build-up of atmosphere and horror that the Resident Evil 2 remake in the police station gives you. It's also why my favourite part of the Resident Evil 3 remake was actually the hospital when you're playing it as Carlos, because you're going through slower and it builds up that atmosphere and that suspense rather than the sections with the Nemesis. But Jill is still awesome, this game is fun, let's get on with the lore finding, shall we? So as we learned in Resident Evil 2, due to the outbreak of the T-virus in the city's water supply, Racoon City has completely fallen, with the vast majority of its people either dead or have become the undead. New creatures walk the streets, as well as some more familiar ones, and this mainline game is all about escaping Racoon City before it gets nuked. Jill, who survived the mansion incident and was still processing what she witnessed in the Arklay Mountains, was investigating Umbrella alongside the rest of the surviving STARS members. Chris went to Europe in late August to find Umbrella's HQ, whilst Barry relocated his family to Canada and Rebecca was off doing her doctorate. This left Brad and Jill to investigate Racoon City and find anything else they could on Umbrella, which proved difficult with Chief Iron stopping them at every attempt, keeping watch on them, and suspending them from the police force. Now, like every greedy corporation seeing an opportunity when the world is burning, Umbrella, having seen the carnage of Racoon City and learnt of what action the government were taking, acted quickly to take out anyone with incriminating evidence on Umbrella in relation to the T-virus outbreak. As well as that, they also thought it would be another great way to gain combat data on the BOWs in the city, so they could further their research. Now, up until the Resident Evil 3 remake's release, I was very curious to see what storylines and theme changes there would have been from the original. You know, we had the new lab at the end, and of course the loss of the clock tower area being reduced to a boss fight, but for the most part it did remain relatively similar. Let's not forget a number of other games like Resident Evil Outbreak and Operation Racoon City had come out after the original Resident Evil 3 dropped, which added some more layers to the lore. But an aspect, and I guess you could see this as more character depth rather than thematic changes, would be Jill's fear of being infected and the trauma that she had, and still has, from what happened at the Spencer mansion. This makes so much sense when you think about it. She barely escaped the first time, and managed at the final moment along with Chris to take out a tyrant before getting in a chopper and escaping before the place blew sky high. Then, not too long afterwards, to quote Brad here, Racoon City,
it's like Arklay on steroids.
She has to deal with a virus, Umbrella, the infected, and all these monsters all over again. Only this time, it's literally everywhere around her. and she actually gets infected by Nemesis during the fight at the clock tower, which surely justified all of her fears at the time, were it not for Carlos saving her. This also adds another layer to her character moving forward, because I'm sure we will see a Resident Evil 5 remake, and her fear of turning will undoubtedly play into the story of that too, when she ends up being mind controlled by Wesker. She has a fear of losing herself, and that is apparent right from the off in this game, which was a brilliant way to add even more depth to a brilliant protagonist. Recently we have also seen, and it's been confirmed in the upcoming canon Netflix CG animated Resident Evil film, Death Island, that Jill will not only be in it, but she will apparently be the main character, which for me is huge, because we haven't seen her in anything, obviously since the Resident Evil 3 remake, but chronologically, nothing since Resident Evil 5. So it'll be great to see her in this new film, with not just Chris, but also Leon, because they've never had any in-game interaction. So that's something to look forward to. But in any case, let's move on to the UBCS. We get to meet the UBCS soldiers again, only this time in the remake they are far more fleshed out. Tyrell I particularly liked. Carlos is far less of a stereotypical douche and much more of a good-hearted guy who signed up for the wrong organisation. When you look into his backstory, however, you get a better idea about why he is the way he is, and how he found his way to be working under Umbrella. Living in severe poverty in an unnamed South American country, Carlos grew up watching his siblings die as a result of gang activity, and whilst trying to provide for his family from as young as 7 years old, and trying to do so without resorting to murder, he would eventually join a local communist liberation front in the hope of helping the poor and vulnerable. 10 years on, and he was one of the best guerrilla fighters in the area, whilst also maintaining his strong moral compass, which is highly evident in Resident Evil 3 with his focus on helping civilians and of course Jill. In the mid-90s, Carlos's guerrilla fighters were wiped out by the government-backed militia, and upon being sentenced to public execution himself, he was then saved by none other than Umbrella with the offer to join the UBCS. And this was around the same time the lesser-known Murphy Seeker joined the UBCS, serving as a sniper expert for the Alpha Platoon before being shot by Nikolai.
What the fuck?
Before we come on to Nikolai, let's talk about Captain Mikhail Victor, a former soldier of the Soviet army who was picked up by Umbrella after the collapse of the Soviet Union, and in seeing his skills firsthand, offered him and his men amnesty after they were also due to be executed. You can start to see how Umbrella picks up its mercenaries. Mikhail was given the rank of captain at the UBCS, and got his honourable sacrifice thanks to Nemesis, and, well, you know, Nikolai.
It's not after you.
It's not fair!
Now, the UBCS on the face of it was sent into Racoon City on the orders of getting civilians out of there, just like Carlos said. Only it was not really why they were there in the first place. As previously mentioned, Umbrella needed battle data, and what better way to get battle data on BOWs than to send in their own army, unwittingly, underprepared, and seemingly under the guise that they're just saving lives. They had absolutely no idea how bad things were, with the majority ending up dead, which was even a bit of a surprise to Umbrella, but that was thanks to our good friend Nikolai. Codenamed Silverwolf, Nikolai Zinoviev was a sergeant in Umbrella's paramilitary and was considered to be a rival to that of USS Commander Hunk. Like Mikhail, he was recruited by Umbrella after the collapse of the Soviet Union, but he had his fingers in a number of different pies when it came to making money. Nikolai had a separate mission from the majority of UBCS soldiers. He, along with a number of others, were monitors, whose job was to collect the combat data of the BOWs in Racoon City. But Nikolai wanted more, so he proceeded to murder other monitors and take their data as well. These orders once again came from the villain we see in the Umbrella Chronicles, Sergei Vladimir, a high-ranking Umbrella official. He too was a monitor, as well as one of the most nefarious Umbrella villains, who I'll admit I would have liked to have seen in the remake timeline, as he plays a large role behind the scenes. Now Nikolai is also aware of the Nemesis and its objective in killing any STARS members still left in the city. We see him continuously betray and murder anyone who gets in his way, as well as being the one that murdered Dr. Bard and destroyed the vaccine research. Still unsure why he wouldn't have taken that sample that we picked up as Carlos, but hey, game logic. Nikolai was also part of another operation in Racoon City, which was to recover blood samples of a tyrant codenamed Thanatos at Racoon University.
Calm down. You must give me your blood.
This was all evident in Resident Evil Outbreak File 1, which I actually never played growing up, but it's highly well regarded amongst the fandom and actually looks really interesting, so I think I will leave the finer details of that mission for another video once I've gone through it, because I really want to play Resident Evil Outbreak. Something else worth noting is that as well as being employed by Umbrella, like other characters that like to play both sides, Nikolai was also under the employment of a rival company to that of Umbrella. Tasked with weakening the UBCS strength in the city, this is what would lead to Umbrella's surprise at how fast their army fell in the city, as well as of course Nikolai sharing his data with the rival company and making sure of the death of any STARS members or law enforcement in general. But of course he would leave the job of Jill Valentine to Nemesis.
Get back! Jill! Jill, what happened? Jill, come in!
Which, in the end, as we know, proved to be a bad decision.
Bishop.
In a number of endings for Resident Evil 3, both in the original and the remake, it is still technically unclear if Nikolai survived the Racoon City incident, as it was confirmed that some of his data did get back to Umbrella. And apparently on the Nest 2 roof was another helicopter, though personally I couldn't see one, so unless he returns in the remake timeline, let's make the assumption that he is dead. Tyrell was also a known monitor for Umbrella. In the original game, Nikolai attempts to murder Tyrell, presumably for his monitor data, and also to get him out of the way. Whereas in the remake, we don't see much that would make us think of Tyrell as anything even close to who Nikolai is. Though he is the one that managed to bargain with the government to delay the launch of the nuke after informing them of the vaccine. But I gotta say, I really like Tyrell's brief appearances in the remake, and he and Carlos made a really nice duo when Jill was out of action. All in all, the UBCS, who are essentially a bunch of gun-for-hire mercenaries, were victims of Umbrella too. Most of them not really knowing the true intentions of their orders, let alone the scale of the biological disaster that was Racoon City on that fateful day of September 28th. I'm amazed I've made it this far into the video without talking about the Nemesis more, as it is a fascinating creature. Fascinating. Why did I say it like that? Created by Umbrella Europe, the T-103 Tyrants were clones of the original T-002 Tyrants, but with one key difference: the addition of the NEA or Nemesis Alpha parasite that would take over the host's brain. This parasite took its inspiration from the Las Plagas parasite of Resident Evil 4, and it can be clearly seen in how the Nemesis infects already T-virus infected zombies, turning them into this. A Nemesis Alpha monster with incredibly similar characteristics to that of the Resident Evil 4 Las Plagas infected Ganado. Now, the intention of this parasite is for it to be sufficiently intelligent enough to take orders, and for the Nemesis that we know and love, codenamed the Pursuer, their orders were to kill all remaining STARS members in Racoon City.
I like you.
After being shown photos of the STARS teams, and with only Chickenheart Brad Vickers and enigmatic badass Jill Valentine left in the city, those were the two targets in his sights. Now, Brad managed to escape him before becoming infected, and then going on to infect Marvin in front of the police station. However, the Nemesis also has the intelligent orders to also eliminate any known associates of Jill. This explains why he specifically went to kill Mikhail in the tram.
Get off my train, shitbird!
We see the Nemesis go through a very gradual transformation as we progress from the game. Some as a result of the encounters with Jill, explosions, water, fire, chemicals. Just to touch on the bridge section, when he goes into the water he comes up with almost something akin to fins. Now it's unclear if this was already part of its genetic makeup, or its body adapted to its surroundings and it continued to survive and breathe underwater. It also loses more cognitive aspects and becomes much more aggressive, but it never loses its original mission in tracking down Jill. As with each installment of the Resident Evil series, we get a few new T-Virus infected monsters, and Resident Evil 3 is no different. And let's talk about a few of them, starting with the most disgusting, the Drain Demois. Demios, that sounds better. Demois, whose name comes from Greek mythology and the personification of dread, so let's call them Dreads. These creatures were originally fleas that mutated after biting already infected humans. Similar to the Chimera from Resident Evil 1, but these guys are much more bitey than slicey, shall we say. There are new types of zombies not seen in the original, which are aptly named Paleheads. Tougher than the regular zombies, and only seen in the Nest 2 lab, obviously added to the game as a tougher version of a normal zombie, and these were created through the Epsilon strain of the T-Virus. Now us Resident Evil fans are all commonly aware of the normal Hunter series, the Hunter B series. In Resident Evil 3 we are introduced to the Hunter Y series in the sewers. An amphibian based BOW originally developed by Umbrella Europe. They were deemed a failure due to their weaknesses such as fire and were due to be terminated, before one Umbrella researcher in Racoon City, who had become somewhat infatuated with them, actually goes and bribes the sewer manager to let him have those creatures in the sewers, which is just insane if you're the sewer manager guy. But anyway, at the time they were generally docile, but of course they ended up killing 2 sewer workers and were also seen in the Raccoon Park as in the original Resident Evil 3 and Raccoon University in Resident Evil Outbreak. So one of the biggest changes from the original game is the addition of the Nest 2 lab, replacing the incineration disposal plant, which I actually really liked. Labs are generally some of the best locations in Resident Evil games in my opinion. You can argue it can feel almost repetitive though, in a way, to end both Resident Evil 2 and Resident Evil 3 remakes in lab areas, but for the lore it does generally make sense, so I was fine with that. The Nest 2 is one of the many labs in Racoon City set up for the testing of BOW combat data, as well as finding a T-Virus cure. After putting together a vaccine and getting chased by a Nemesis for the 100th time, Jill once again ruins his life before Carlos dumps some corrosive chemicals on him, forcing the parasite within the Nemesis to mutate into this.
Good luck!
Just so you know, this is the last fucking time.
Where Jill gets to be a badass again and use a giant freaking railgun a la Metal Gear Solid, codenamed The Finger. Using it for its intended purpose, it was created specifically to destroy BOWs that presumably get out of control. So not a bad failsafe from Umbrella. Now it is the roof where we reach the conclusion of the game and 2 different endings where Carlos and Nikolai are fistfighting old school after he destroyed the vaccine Jill was due to take to the US government. First off, could we please just watch this much cooler, better ending that is obviously a non-canon bad ending, but it's still great. Just take it away, Nikolai.
Carlos! No!
You are done.
Mimicking the ending of Resident Evil 1, in the true ending they escape via the chopper as a large explosion sounds behind them. Only this time, rather than just a strange mansion in the mountains that gets blown up, it's an entire city destroyed after the decision by the government was taken to minimise any future damage the T-virus outbreak could cause. However, as we know with all the games that follow it, other viruses are created, leaks and links back to the T-virus are well known, and despite the destruction of Racoon City, the T-virus would prove to only be the beginning of biological warfare in this insane Resident Evil world. Thank you for watching this, and if you've been watching all of these, then thank you even more so much. I feel like this was the weakest Resident Evil video I've done so far, so yeah, watch the other ones because they're much better. And I'm not sure if it's just me still trying to get healthy, or that Resident Evil 3 just has less stuff to dive into. But hey, the Resident Evil 4 remake is here and I'm so hyped to play it, so let's get to that, shall we?